By now, everyone should know what a ganker is, and at the very least, how a gank is performed. All champions in the game can gank, although their effectiveness varies greatly between them. Some champions are terrible at ganking, and some are really good at it. There are 3 types of gankers, and one of them is just a combination of the other 2. The 3 types are damage gankers, control gankers, and the perfect gankers. With just the names, you can tell what each of them means. Damage gankers are those that mostly provide only damage for a kill, the control gankers are the ones who cannot control and lock down the target, and the perfect gankers are the ones who can lock down a target and dish out the damage. Note that being called a perfect ganker doesn't necessarily mean they're flat out the best, but they simply are self-sufficient and do not rely on assistance from teammates. The qualities most important for a jungle ganker are frequency, survivability, control, and damage. Again, the names of the qualities are pretty self-explanatory, but I'll detail them out still. Frequency for a ganker is how often and how rapidly can they gank. You cannot apply much pressure if your ganks only come every 1 minute or 2. This isn't even just going in and bothering a lane, but actually applying proper pressure. Some junglers are capable of ganking a lane repeatedly within a minute without losing any effectiveness. Being able to gank frequently allows you to emit pressure on lanes even when you aren't ganking, because it would be reasonable for your enemies to always be alert against you. Survivability is how risky it is for the jungler to be ganking. In the best case scenario, the ganker just goes in and kills the target and leaves. In a realistic scenario, the ganker is at a risk of being counter-ganked or getting outplayed and outright murdered by the laner. Gankers with high survivability are those that can disengage from a fight easily and not lose much after a failure. Control can be thought of how well a ganker's tools are at locking down the target. It's just basically how strong your crowd control is, but it doesn't necessarily assume that just having crowd control will make you the best ganker. Gankers with strong crowd control over their targets tend to have abilities that are less prone to failure, or they're flexible enough to have multiple avenues of approach for a gank. Damage is basically if you can kill something. It's rather pointless to lock down a target if you can't actually finish the target off. Junglers with low damage tend to have to rely on their teammates to do the killing for them while they hold on to the target. Another thing to add is that some junglers also see a huge spike in power once they obtain their ultimates. Many of them become incredibly strong gankers with their ultimates, but reliance on them effectively neuters their ganking frequency and makes them overall slower. They still have times where they could be acceptable and sometimes even preferred. Also, I have to note that there are a handful of junglers who are still better than many other gankers even when ultimates are involved. When looking for a jungle ganker as a first pick, you have to consider one that is well-rounded in all aspects. If you picked a jungler with lots of control and no damage, and your teammates are lightweights in lane, then you might find yourself unable to actually kill someone. If you have no crowd control but high damage, yet your teammates also lack crowd control, you may never actually catch the targets you want. You want a jungler that can at least dish out some damage, or can at least gank frequently enough to deter the enemy team. Both Lee Sin and Elise are 2 of the safest first pick jungle gankers. They're versatile in what team compositions they can be in, although they do have spotty late games. They're both versatile in clearing, sustained, are very safe in ganking, have high mobility, and can exert great control on the targets, all while dealing strong damage. They're the total package of what you want in a ganker, let alone a jungler. Between the 2, it is pretty much preference. Elise is an AP and has an easier time doing her combo, although she has less mobility than Lee Sin does, and definitely less build options. Although again, an AD build and an AP build are wildly different to begin with. Lee Sin also has overall more damage and has a far better matchup pool than Elise. For tankier first pick choices, you can go with Jarvan and Gragas. They are similar to Elise and Lee Sin in quality, except they trade jungle sustain for tankiness. There is no problem with picking them though, so they're pretty much top-notch choices as well. You can generally pick most gankers as first pick, but being first pick tends to be a weakness for gankers in general, as the enemy team can decide to pick champions that can lane safer against them. The following champion suggestions will be attached to specific scenarios. I will specify what traits a ganker needs in order to deal with those situations, and if I don't mention a champion, you can do it yourself and see if that champion has the traits to deal with the same situation. Basically, if a champion isn't named, you're free and encouraged to justify it yourself. Also, if you ever have time where multiple scenarios are taking place at once, then simply mix the traits needed and find one that meets them closely. This will make sense once I break down the scenarios for you. If you have an opponent in lane that is a massive threat that needs to be controlled, then you need a high frequency ganker with at least moderate damage. Safety is not really too much of concern as much as keeping the opponent down is. You have to be able to constantly harass your target, or at the very least need a little preparation to gank if an opportunity arises. Elise is once again one of the best for this scenario. Her cocoon can snipe a target and you can simply follow it up with an execution aided by your teammate. Best of all, she doesn't rely on an ultimate since she doesn't even have one, and and has low mana reliance, so she can continuously return for ganks. The fact that her cocoon is a ranged hard control is important against a dangerous target because it denies them the chance to fight back, and she won't have to put herself in great risk in order to do so. Pantheon is considered one of the most brutal gankers in the game, and it is even debated if he should even be allowed to jungle. While he is awful in clearing and has horrible mana issues, his stun is quick and targeted, and he follows it up with massive damage. Not only that, but retaliation against him by some targets is weak, so even some dangerous targets may find it hard to deal with him. The best part is that his stun also works as a gap closer and has decent range attached to it, lowering his reliance on summoner spells. After he reaches level 6, he can just start bombing his target or other lanes from quite a distance, bypassing any wards or protection his target might have. If you need a lane buried, then he can do it for you easily. Vi is also a brutal ganker, but of a different vein than Pantheon. Vi's early ganking has a lot of burst and can potentially put out more damage than Pantheon at times, but is far less effective than the Spartans. That said, her level 6 ganking is one of the most powerful in the game, and, aside from blinking and dragging her away, very few targets have ways of dealing with it. She will guarantee a chokeslam on a target, and she has the means to approach the range for it with just her Q. Maokai has less damage than the previous suggestions, but is a high frequency ganker with a lot of control. His snare is like Vi's ultimate, but with less range or ability to amplify it with his own kit, other than summoner spells. Still though, he's a good alternative if you need a tanky ganker to apply pressure on a dangerous target. If you have opponents who are very slippery with dashes, mobility, and whatnot, then you need to have gankers with either high amounts of lockdown, burst, or instant crowd control. You cannot give them the chance to use their escapes because even a split second of freedom can screw you out of a gank. Pantheon once again reigns supreme in this because his stun is a targeted ability that doesn't miss. You can flash stun a target or simply leap from the shadows and open up with burst and kill them before they can escape. Vi works against jittery champions too, although her ability to gank these champions is actually weaker pre-6. Her ultimate is one of the best at flat out shutting down these jittery champions. Ironically, Fiddlesticks is one of the best against these targets. He's very slow, he does not have burst, and he's overall clunky, but his instantaneous fear absolutely shuts him down. His usual ganks consist of either fearing a target and then silencing them to lock them out of their escapes, or forcing out their escapes with his silence and then catching them with his fear. Even if they blink, the Dark Wind will still hit them and silence them, which gives Fiddlesticks or his ally enough time to make a play and lock the target down further. On a tankier side, Maokai once again does the same thing as Vi, but on a basic ability and may be reliant on Flash for the surprise factor. On that same note, Nautilus works well too, although his speed can work against him. He's much riskier, but his shutdown on the target is far more brutal than even Fiddlesticks, and his ultimate follows the same rule as Vi and Maokai in that it guarantees they will at least be vulnerable for a little bit. If your teammates are playing damage lightweights but can assist with crowd control, then you can pick champions with high damage and survivability. You want to be able to actually kill the target, so you need your own damage, but it can still be risky because either your teammate can screw up or you can get counter-ganked. Once again, Pantheon comes out of the top here because he provides high killing power and still brings in some form of control, so I don't need to go over him again. Lee Sin too, for pretty much the same reasons. Kha'Zix is one of the best damage dealers from the jungle, although he's generally unsafe prior to level 6. He progressively gets stronger and can dish out some very clean damage on his targets. Once he reaches level 6, his deadliness and versatility skyrockets, and his reliance on the control of his teammates is lessened. He also works against slippery targets, as he can burst down a target and potentially chase them down for their last bits of health if they flee last second. Shaco is the biggest middle finger in the game. He's not too reliant on his teammates to control the target, as he can just sneak in and shank a person, and he can even emit some conditional control of his own. The best part for Shaco is that he can ditch the fight if it gets sketchy. However, getting counter-ganked as Shaco can mean certain death against some matchups, but this is why you don't blindly run in as him. Evelyn works in the same way as Shaco, although with permanent stealth and no true gap closer. Her disengage is far weaker too, so she's even weaker to counter-ganks, but at least she has more versatile approaches to the target and a far better ultimate than Shaco does. There's honestly not much to say about damage gankers, as it pretty much just involves sneaking in some way and trying to do as much damage as you can before being forced to run away or killing the target. So that's pretty much it. If your teammates picked useless laners, as in they have low damage and no control, you will now be forced to bring both qualities yourself. You need to provide the control, and it has to be solid for every potential gank, while also dishing out better than average damage. Xin Zhao's crowd control is not perfect, but it is combined with his high damage, and not many he can stand up to his assaults. He's incredibly high risk because he lacks any form of disengage and is super vulnerable to counter ganks. However, in a situation like this, you need someone who provides high sustained damage who can just tear the target apart, while at the same time at least slowing down the target's escape. Rek'Sai pretty much works the same as Xin Zhao, except with even weaker crowd control, but at least a means of escape, and her tunnel vision can warn you of any potential counter ganks if you're vigilant enough. Some of you are likely wondering about why I haven't mentioned many level 6 gankers like Malphite or Warwick. The thing with them is that it really depends on how slow and non-aggro the enemy is. If your opponents are very dangerous, they may snowball out of control, and even reaching level 6 might not be enough to help deal with them. Junglers who cannot gank pre-6 are at such a disadvantage that you have to justify them beyond the early phase. Malphite would be taken because his team fighting and initiation would be strong later, and he could debuff attack speed reliant champions. Warwick would be strong in pick compositions where you can try to grab someone and kill them before a fight starts. Other than that, they are generally only reliable against team compositions that are not going to invade you or go for kills and will let you clear your jungle unmolested. Now I'm certain some of you are wanting to know what my opinion is on who the best gankers are. Keep in mind that this doesn't mean they're the best at every single situation. This just means who I think are the best, most well-rounded gankers. Also note that I will be disregarding all of the things like clearing, sustain, or matchups. If I want to know who the best jungle gankers are, just taking into account their ganking prowess, I would give my vote to Lee Sin, Jarvan, Pantheon, and Gragas. They can gank anyone through all courses of the game and are not reliant on their ultimates. Once they do obtain them though, they add a whole other level of ganking prowess. They're self-sufficient, deadly, versatile, and manly. They're my picks for the best jungle gankers. Either way, I hope the first episode of the series was satisfying, and if there's anything you feel could be changed or I forgot to cover, let me know in the comments below. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I have a few sponsors that are helping me maintain this channel, such as Crunchyroll, Pro Build Systems, and Loot Crate. I have links to these services in the description below. Using them and using my codes directly supports my channel.